one victory against the SAFE Act in New York State, which is that one victory is still owned by libertarian attorney and activist and a dear friend of mine, Jim Ostrowski. So maybe instead of consistently believing the useless and bloviating GOP and other gun groups, we should start giving time, money, and resources to those who are willing to take the fight and really fight for our battles. So with that, I get to introduce you guys to Jim Ostrowski, who's the attorney on this case, a friend of mine and one of the good guys who's gonna win this case and make us all freer. Jim?
Thanks a lot, Dwayne and Steve. And I just want to point out Mike's a little modest. He's actually a member of the Supreme Court Bar, which I'm not. So in addition to being a plaintiff, he's signing the brief. My name's on there somewhere. So I appreciate Mike serving the dual role. So it's been a long and windy road for me when it comes to the Second Amendment and gun control. I've been a supporter of the Second Amendment for 42 years because I believe that the right to bear arms is a natural right that existed before the government was formed in 1788. We have a natural, meaning not granted by the government, right to defend ourselves against anyone or any government that violates our rights to life, liberty, and property. I have for 42 years believed that the primary purpose of the Second Amendment is to deter and protect the people against the kinds of government tyranny that prompted the revolution itself, and which have been ubiquitous throughout history and presently where there are regimes where the people do not have the right to bear arms. The Supreme Court finally recognized that there is an individual right in Heller versus District of Columbia in 2008. I was ahead of them by 29 years. In fact, I published on this as early as 1994. And when I repeated that point in a Buffalo News column in 2003, the local legal establishment scoffed, but they were wrong. But I wasn't always a Second Amendment supporter. As a young person, what did I know about the right to bear arms? I did see my father's World War II carbine in the closet, but we lived in the city and did not have a gun culture there. I was taught exactly nothing about the Second Amendment in school. What a shame. As a teenager, I read Robert Sherrill's largely anti-gun book, The Saturday Night Special, which features a cover with the usual Freudian gun reference prominently displayed. Liberals don't have much of an imagination. I should say progressives. A few years later, when I had schooled myself on the issue, I put aside my childish thoughts about gun control. Even though the Supreme Court ruled in our favor in Heller, the right to bear arms is in serious jeopardy. New York State courts have utterly refused to follow Heller, kind of a judicial insurrection of sorts. We know the new administration would grab every single gun you have if they thought they could get away with it. And we know that at the first possible opportunity, they will appoint judges who think the Second Amendment is an absolute joke. Most lower federal courts have similarly disrespected the right to bear arms. The reasons why are explained in our brief, which you can read on the Supreme Court's website, and in my book, The Second Amendment Works, which is free on Steve Filano's website, also on Amazon for almost giving it away prices. First, the gun control is simply a manifestation of the idiotic ideology of progressivism, which magically assumes that there is a government solution to every human problem and uses inert pieces of metal as scapegoats for the many failures of progressive policies and the violence that those failures have produced. Second, the ideology of progressivism has polluted the courts and led judges to smuggle in progressive ideas into their contrived and inscrutable formulas of balancing interests on gun laws that always somehow seems to lead to upholding any and all gun control legislation. This is all done, as we exposed in the current brief, in the face of all facts and logic and without the slightest hint of scientific justification for their conclusions. As my book illustrates, all the evidence is to the contrary, that the Second Amendment works. Finally, we are losing in the courts because even our own lawyers refuse to argue that gun laws must be evaluated only after recognizing the true purpose of the Second Amendment to deter government tyranny. Our own lawyers have refused to make that argument, and they are firmly convinced that they are simply adopting a clever strategy that will produce small incremental victories in the courts by not offending anyone's ideological proclivities. They are wrong, and the record proves it. Without making the sweeping government tyranny argument and attacking contrived and rigged balancing tests of progressive judges, with the resulting smokescreen laid down by a blizzard of statistical studies that focus on street crime and ignore the larger purposes of the right to bear arms, we are getting killed in the courts since Heller and McDonald, and unless we change our strategy fast and boldly, as we have done in this brief, we will only continue to lose. And if Joe Biden names just one judge to the Supreme Court, we may lose our right completely. Just remember that the minority in Heller would have held that there is no individual right to bear arms at all. Will any judge appointed by Biden be better than those 4 far-left liberal judges in the Heller minority? No. He or she will be worse, as Biden will name whomever his far-left controllers and handlers tell them to. In other words, Second Amendment lawyers need to go big or go home. So this case is for all the marbles. It is game, set, match. The right to bear arms is not just another important right. It is the most important right. It is the right that protects all the others. It is the reason America exists in the first place, since the Revolutionary War began in response to the British gun control mission at Lexington Green on April 19th, 1775. And as we reminded the Supreme Court on the issue of the right to carry in public, the Minutemen were not in their homes that day. I would go further and state that the right to bear arms is, with the possible exception of war and peace, the most important political issue at any time in any place. History shows that when people lack the right to defend themselves, they are often victimized, murdered, tyrannized, and enslaved. Throughout history, the hallmark of slavery has been that the slave could not legally bear arms. On the other hand, the early theorists of small r Republican government viewed the right to bear arms as the hallmark of a free citizen. That is why, while we hope to win this motion and win the subsequent appeal, we also wrote this brief for the public itself, to provide the education in the history and purpose of the Second Amendment that they are surely not getting in the schools controlled by left progressives. Failure is not an option. Unlike the other gun groups, we don't believe the Supreme Court is the last word about whether we have the natural right to liberty. We believe they are merely the first word. We don't want to be like Solzhenitsyn, and I'm paraphrasing from the Gulag Archipelago. When we were in the camps, we burned with the thought that just a little bit of resistance at the beginning of the Stalinist era, when they were rounding people up and sending them to Siberia, maybe we could have changed things. If, he wrote. But then he stopped himself and said, we just didn't love liberty enough. We didn't love liberty enough. Let me close by quoting a strong supporter of the right to bear arms, who I don't think I'm going to have to identify. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Thank you, and I want to bring Steve Filano, who's the #1 Second Amendment activist in the country, back up to close out our press conference.